Introduction of receiving. Receiving is the act of inspecting and either accepting or rejecting deliveries. It is an activity with many facets. The receiving process ranges from by letting drivers deliver orders in a receiving facility, having various receiving clerks waiting at the delivery entrance to check every single item to see that it meets the specifications outlined in the purchase order. Receiving objectives. Obtain the correct amount and correct quality at the right time with the proper supplier services for the correct edible portion cost. To check that the delivered order meets these criteria. To control these received products and services. Record the documentation during receiving activities. The essential for receiving. To ensure that the receiving function is appropriately performed, several factors must be in place. Competent personnel. Such personnel should be placed in charge of all the receiving activities. By competent, we mean persons, full-time or part-time, who are reasonably intelligent, honest, interested in the job, and somewhat knowledgeable about the items to be received. Once such a person is designated, it is necessary to train them to recognize acceptable and inferior products and services. However, where the line cook-receiver combination is used, management may need to make quality checks and supervise the receiving activity more closely. Appropriate training. It is crucial to provide the receiving agent with appropriate training. Training can be a time-consuming, costly procedure, but it is essential. The receiver must be able to recognize the various quality levels of merchandise that are delivered to the hospitality operation. He or she also must be able to handle the necessary paperwork or computerized record keeping adequately. Furthermore, the receiver must know what to do when something out of the ordinary arises. While the training costs may be considerable, they will be recovered many times if the receiver can prevent merely 1 or 2 receiving mistakes per month. In a smaller operation, a reliable scale is a bare minimum. It is surprising how many small operations save money by purchasing an inexpensive scale that is often inaccurate. Then, because it doesn't work anyway, they do not use it. The action is the falsest of economy sins. Even if the operators trust their suppliers, unintentional errors can still occur. Proper receiving equipment. Proper receiving is a must. Since many deliveries must be weighed, accurate scales are, perhaps, the most critical pieces of equipment in the receiving area. Temperature probes let receivers check the temperatures of refrigerated and frozen products. Rule measures are useful in checking trim of, for example, fat on portion cut steaks. Calculators or DAS are needed to verify costs. Cutting instruments, such as a produced knife, are handy when product sampling is part of the receiving process. Conveyor belts, hand trucks, and motorized forklift trucks can help transport the received items to the storage areas or, in some cases, directly to a production area. Where applicable, receiving agents must have the technology to read existing barcodes or radio frequency ID tags on product packaging to process shipments correctly. In short, receivers should be provided with the proper equipment to do the most efficient, thorough job possible. Proper receiving facilities. If an operation wants a receiver to perform adequately, they must have the facilities that will make that possible. By facilities, we refer to the entire receiving area, and by proper, we mean, for example, that the area should be well lit, large enough to work in comfortably, reasonably secure, and convenient for both drivers and receivers. In some old buildings, or a hospitality operation built into another kind of building, for example, an office building, management may not be able to provide what we have described exactly, but the closer the management can move to this ideal, the better the receiver can do his or her job. Appropriate receiving hours. Deliveries should be scheduled carefully. If possible, deliveries should be staggered so that the receiver is not rushed. Also, all delivery times should be relatively predictable so that the competent receiver will be on hand, and receiving will not be left to whoever happens to be handy. Remember, we mentioned that one of the most significant benefits of one-stop shopping is to minimize any difficulties and expenses arising from too many deliveries. Perhaps now you can appreciate why this potential benefit sways many managers. It not only reduces the number of hours a receiver must work, but it also allows for a more secure backdoor routing and, because of fewer transactions, minimized theft opportunities. Available copies of all the specifications. The receiver will need these as references. The specification can help whenever ambiguity arises, as it sometimes will. For example, when a supplier is out of a particular soap brand, they might deliver what is believed to be a comparable substitute. When this occurs, it becomes necessary for the deliverer and receiver to have a reference handy, unless the buyer insists on handling any substitutions personally. The receiver will ask him or her to inspect the substitute. In many cases, though, drivers are not eager to wait for this decision. It is expensive for them to leave their trucks idle. As a result, decisions must often be made quickly, and a copy of the specifications can be quite helpful. Available copies of purchase orders. Most hospitality operators feel that a receiver should know what is due to be delivered to be prepared. These purchase order copies are necessary to ensure that this happens. Receiving method. The most popular receiving technique is sometimes referred to as invoice receiving. In the scheme of things, an invoice, or bill, accompanies the delivery. An invoice is an itemized statement of quantity, price, and other information that usually resembles the purchase order. An invoice may be nothing more than a photocopy of the original purchase order. The receiver uses the invoice to check against the quantity, quality, and prices of the items delivered. It may also compare the invoice with a copy of the original purchase order as a further check. The order is either accepted or rejected. If accepted, it is stored or delivered to a production department. If rejected, appropriate credit must be obtained. Sometimes, an invoice does not accompany the delivery. In these situations, the receiver normally fills out some type of form right there on the spot and treats this completed form as the invoice. Other receiving methods. Standing order receiving. Blind receiving. Odd hours receiving. Drop shipment receiving. Mailed deliveries. Cash on delivery deliveries. Good receiving practices. Receivers should follow a number of sound procedures. Most of them fall mainly under the security category. Receivers should beware of excess ice, watered-down products, wrapping paper, and packaging that can add dead weight to the delivered items. Receivers must subtract the amount of this dead weight, which is sometimes referred to as the tear weight, from the gross weight to compute the merchandiser's net weight. Receivers should always check the quality under the top layer. Make sure that all succeeding layers are equal to the facing layer. Receivers should always examine packages for leakage or other forms of water damage. The damaged packages could indicate that the package contents are unusable. If the containers, especially cans, are swollen, the contents are probably spoiled, and receivers should reject the shipment. If a package label carries an expiration date, receivers should ensure that it is within acceptable limits. Receivers should also make sure that the dating codes are correct. Receivers should not weigh everything together. For example, they should separate hamburger from steak and weigh each product by itself. If they weigh these items together, they might begin to buy a hamburger at a steak price. Receivers should be wary of drivers eager to help them carry the items to their storage areas. Trust is not the issue. The big problems with letting people on the premises are the distraction they cause among employees and the possibility that liability insurance premiums will increase. Receivers should watch for incomplete shipments. The driver might ask them to sign for a complete order after telling them that the rest of the order will arrive later. Later may never come. Receivers should spot check portioned products for portion weights. For example, if receivers buy portioned sausage patties by the pound and sell them by the piece, 2-ounce sausage patty that is consistently 4-ounce overweight will inflate the food cost. But operators will not reflect this in their sales since their menu price will still reflect a 2-ounce portion. It is equally troubling if the sausage patties are underweight and are purchased by the piece. A short weight of as little as 1.8 ounce can cost quite a bit of money in the long run. Receivers should be careful of closed shipping containers with pre-printed dates, weights, counts, or quality standards. Someone may have repacked. Reducing receiving costs. Receivers can reduce receiving costs a few ways without losing a proportionate amount of control. Some common cost-saving methods are described in the following list. Field inspectors. Large firms sometimes use field inspectors, which saves some time for receivers in that they do not have to check for quality and quantity. This is because the inspector often seals the packages to be delivered. Though the overall cost may not decrease, field inspectors, like receivers, must be paid. Night and early morning delivery. These odd-hour deliveries are often the rule in many large cities' downtown sections to avoid daytime traffic congestion. With fewer distractions, drivers can make more deliveries, and part of the lower transportation cost per delivery may be passed on to hospitality operations. A variation of this procedure is the night drop, in which a driver uses a key to get in, places the items inside the door, locks up, and leaves. Opinion varies among operators regarding the degree of trust required for this practice. One-stop shopping. One-stop shopping is, perhaps, the most common method of reducing receiving costs. Although some people are not enthusiastic about this buying method, everyone agrees that it can reduce receiving costs. In trying to reduce receiving costs, receivers must be careful not to shift the costs around simply. For instance, low receiving costs accompany one-stop shopping. The savings from reducing the number of potential suppliers may be wiped out by higher AP prices from a single supplier. Certain inescapable costs must be incurred if receivers expect to meet the purchasing and receiving functions objectives. It is essential not to negate the effective job the buyer may have done. In the end, the receiving process affords few cost-cutting possibilities unless receivers are willing to give up a certain amount of control.